The morning sun hadn't even peeked over the horizon when Commander Zora Williams laced up her running shoes. The neighborhood was still asleep, streets empty and quiet, just how she liked it. 15 years as a Navy SEAL had taught her to appreciate these peaceful moments. They were rare in her line of work. Zora stretched her tall, muscular frame on the front porch of her childhood home. She'd grown up in this small town of Oak Ridge, left to serve her country, and now was back for a short break. 2 weeks of leave after a mission she couldn't talk about, in a country most Americans couldn't find on a map. "Be back in an hour, Auntie," she called softly through the screen door, knowing her aunt was already awake and making coffee in the kitchen. "Watch yourself out there," came the reply, the same words her aunt had said to her every morning since she was a teenager. The rhythm of her footsteps on the pavement felt good. 5 miles every morning, no matter where in the world she found herself. Through rain, through heat, through exhaustion. The discipline had kept her alive more times than she could count. Few people in town knew what Zora really did. To most neighbors, she was just that nice Williams girl who joined the Navy after high school. They had no idea she'd become one of only 3 black women to ever complete SEAL training, pushing through the brutal challenges that made even hardened soldiers quit. Her mind drifted back to those training days as she ran. The freezing ocean swims. The sleepless weeks. Instructors shouting that she didn't belong there. But Zora had never quit anything in her life. Not when her father died when she was 12. Not when her high school counselor said military special forces wasn't realistic for someone like her. And certainly not when her SEAL training class started with 147 candidates and dwindled to just 29. The streets were starting to wake up now. A newspaper delivery truck rumbled past. An early shift worker backed out of a driveway, coffee mug balanced on their car roof. Nobody gave her a second look, just another runner in a hoodie and leggings. That's how Zora preferred it. At 37, she'd earned decorations that most military personnel only read about. She'd led teams in operations across 4 continents. Last year, the president himself had handed her a commendation in a ceremony that couldn't be photographed. But here, she was invisible. Just another face. Her watch beeped, mile 2 complete. Her breathing was still easy, body warmed up but not yet tested. This middle stretch of the run was where she did her best thinking. Tomorrow, she would need to call her commanding officer about the next deployment. There was talk about a training role at Coronado, teaching the next generation of special operators. Part of her liked that idea, sharing what she'd learned, helping shape the future. But another part wasn't ready to step back from field operations. Not yet. The neighborhood changed as she ran into the older part of town. These streets weren't as well kept. Potholes interrupted her stride. Some streetlights still flickered despite the growing daylight. Her aunt had asked why she didn't stick to the newer, nicer parts of town for her runs. Zora had just smiled. She never avoided places because they made other people uncomfortable. She turned down Oak Street, picking up her pace slightly. A stray dog watched her from beside a fence but didn't approach. Even animals seemed to sense something in her movement, a confidence, a readiness that set her apart. 3 miles in now. Her body had found its perfect rhythm. Sweat rolled down her back despite the cool morning air. These daily runs weren't just about physical fitness. They kept her mind sharp ready. In her line of work, letting your guard down meant risking not just your life, but the lives of your team. The sound of a car engine approaching from behind made her instinctively move closer to the curb. The vehicle slowed beside her. A police cruiser with 2 officers inside. Zora didn't break her stride, but a familiar tension crept into her shoulders. She'd experienced this before, even in uniform. Even with medals on her chest. The cruiser pulled ahead and stopped. Both doors opened. And just like that, Zora Williams knew her peaceful morning run was over. The police cruiser's lights weren't flashing, but the way it pulled sharply in front of Zora told her everything she needed to know. She slowed to a stop, breathing steady despite having run 3 miles. Years of training had taught her to control her body's responses, even in moments of surprise. 2 officers stepped out. The taller one, with a buzz cut and sunglasses despite the early hour, kept his hand resting near his holster. The shorter officer, older with a thick mustache, approached her directly. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" The older officer asked, not bothering with a greeting. Zora kept her voice level. "Morning run, sir. I do 5 miles every day." She stayed perfectly still, hands visible at her sides. Nothing about this was new to her. "Got some ID on you?" The taller officer asked, moving closer. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" Zora's question was polite but direct. She'd been taught to know her rights long before she learned to disarm enemy combatants. The mustached officer's face hardened. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area." Zora looked around at the empty street, the quiet houses. What kind of suspicious activity? "Don't get smart," the taller officer snapped. "Just answer the question. What are you doing here?" "As I said, I'm running. I grew up 3 blocks from here. My aunt still lives in the house." Zora spoke clearly, maintaining eye contact. "I'm home on leave." "Leave?" The older officer looked skeptical. "What, like vacation?" "Military leave," Zora clarified. "I'm in the Navy." The officers exchanged glances. The taller one smirked slightly. "Right, the Navy. Got any proof of that?" "My ID is in my armband." Zora slowly pointed to the running band on her upper arm. "May I reach for it?" The taller officer stepped closer. "Keep your hands where I can see them. We'll get it." The situation was escalating for no reason Zora could see, except the one reason she'd faced her entire life. She'd been in war zones that felt less tense than this quiet street in her hometown. "Look," she tried again, "I'm just out for a morning run in my own neighborhood. I haven't done anything wrong." The mustached officer moved around behind her. "People who haven't done anything wrong don't usually argue with police." "I'm not arguing," Zora said. "I'm asking why I'm being detained." "And now you're telling us how to do our job," the taller officer said, voice rising. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Zora felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, but countered it with the breathing techniques she'd mastered in SEAL training. "Stay calm. Assess. Don't escalate." "Officer, I'd like to call my brother. He's an attorney." She reached for her phone. It happened in an instant. The taller officer lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "She's reaching." Zora found herself slammed face first into the pavement, the officer's knee digging into her back. The impact stung, but she'd been trained to withstand much worse. She could have broken his hold in 3 different ways. Could have had both officers on the ground in under 5 seconds, but that would only make things worse. "I was reaching for my phone," she said, her cheek pressed against the rough concrete. "Shut up," the officer growled, wrenching her arms behind her. "You people always have some explanation." The handcuffs bit into her wrists, cold metal against skin that had endured the icy waters of specialist training. Through it all, Zora kept her breathing steady. Tactical assessment. 2 agitated officers, no witnesses yet, broad daylight. Best option, compliance with verbal clarity. "My ID is in my running band," she repeated. "I'm Commander Zora Williams, United States Navy. I'm stationed at Naval Base San Diego. You can verify my identity." The mustached officer laughed. "Commander? Sure thing, lady, and I'm the Secretary of Defense." A car slowed as it passed. Someone watching now. The taller officer noticed too and yanked Zora to her feet. "Let's continue this conversation at the station," he said, voice suddenly more professional for the benefit of witnesses. As they walked her toward the cruiser, Zora caught sight of someone on a nearby porch. An older man in a bathrobe, watching intently. He held a phone up, clearly recording. The mustached officer noticed too and muttered something under his breath. Zora straightened her back as they approached the police car. The same posture she'd maintained through gunfire and explosions, through sandstorms and enemy territory. This was different, but in some ways, it was exactly what she'd been training for all these years, staying composed when everything around her was chaos. With her wrists cuffed behind her back, Zora took stock of her situation. Her training had prepared her for far worse than this. She'd once spent 14 hours motionless in muddy water, waiting for an extraction team. She'd survived a firefight with nothing but a combat knife. This was just another test of her control. "You're making a mistake," she said calmly as the officers pushed her toward their car, not pleading, just stating a fact. "Yeah, we haven't heard that one before," the taller officer said, his grip unnecessarily tight on her arm. In her mind, Zora mapped out exactly how she could break free. A quick shift of weight, drop the shoulder, twist at precisely the right angle. The handcuffs would still be a problem, but she could handle that too. She'd done it in training with a blindfold on. But that wasn't the right move here. Not on American soil, not in her hometown. My military ID is in my armband, she repeated. If you check it, you'll save everyone a lot of trouble. The mustached officer rolled his eyes. Right, the Lady Navy SEAL. Next you'll tell us you fly fighter jets on weekends. Zora didn't correct him. Let them underestimate her. It was what most people did until they saw her in action. What's going on here? A voice called from across the street. The man with the phone had walked closer, still recording. He was older, gray-haired, wearing a doctor's coat over pajamas. Why are you handcuffing her? Police business, sir, the mustached officer called back. Please step back. I know this woman, the doctor said, still approaching. She's my neighbor's niece. What has she done? The taller officer turned, blocking the doctor's view. Sir, I need you to back up now. But the doctor wasn't intimidated. I'm Dr. Thompson. I'm recording this interaction and I'm concerned about what I'm seeing. The mention of recording changed the energy immediately. The taller officer's voice became professionally neutral. We're responding to reports of suspicious activity in the area, sir. What suspicious activity? Running. The doctor was closer now, his phone still raised. I've lived on this street for 30 years. Commander Williams grew up here. Zora remained silent, letting this unexpected ally speak. The officer's grip on her arms had loosened slightly. Commander. The mustached officer looked at her again, doubt flickering across his face for the first time. Zora Williams, the doctor continued. Navy SEAL. One of the first women to complete the training, if I recall correctly. The taller officer scoffed. Sir, there are no female SEALs. Actually, Zora said quietly, there are 3 of us now. Something in her voice, the calm confidence perhaps, made both officers look at her more closely. Check her ID, the doctor suggested. It's right there on her arm, isn't it, Commander? Zora nodded, left armband. After a moment's hesitation, the mustached officer carefully pulled the zipper on her armband and removed her military ID. His eyes widened as he read it. Lieutenant Commander Zora Williams, he read aloud. Special Warfare Command. The taller officer leaned over to look. That doesn't mean she's. Look at the insignia, the doctor interrupted. That's a SEAL trident. A long silence followed as both officers stared at the ID, then at Zora. She met their gaze steadily, her breathing controlled, her posture straight despite the handcuffs. May I suggest, she said evenly, that you remove these cuffs before your supervisor arrives? It would be better for everyone. Our supervisor? The mustached officer frowned. The doctor held up his phone. I called Chief Reynolds while you were detaining the commander. He should be here in about 2 minutes. I believe you know him, Commander Williams. You were both at that veterans' breakfast last Memorial Day. The sound of an approaching siren confirmed his words. The officers exchanged glances that mixed confusion with growing alarm. This doesn't change the fact that you are in a high-crime area, the taller officer said, but his voice lacked conviction now. I was running in my childhood neighborhood, Zora corrected him. And regardless of where I was, running isn't a crime. Another police car pulled up, this one with lights flashing. A heavy-set man with salt and pepper hair stepped out, his uniform showing the rank of chief. Zora straightened her shoulders, the way she always did before addressing a superior officer. Even handcuffed, even treated unjustly, her military bearing remained impeccable. The mustached officer quickly moved to uncuff her. As the cold metal released her wrists, Zora felt no triumph, only a familiar sadness. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. But maybe, with the right approach, she could help make it one of the last. Chief Reynolds approached with quick, purposeful steps. His face was unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. The 2 officers stiffened as he neared, their earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. Commander Williams, the chief said, nodding respectfully to Zora. I didn't expect to see you back in town so soon. Just on leave for 2 weeks, sir, Zora replied, rubbing her wrists where the handcuffs had been. The marks would fade quickly. The memory would not. Chief Reynolds turned to his officers. Officer Burke, Officer Daniels, I'd like an explanation. The taller officer, Burke, cleared his throat. We received reports of suspicious activity in this area, Chief. We were performing a routine stop-and. What suspicious activity? Dr. Thompson interrupted, his phone still recording. A woman jogging at sunrise. The chief held up a hand. I'd like to hear from my officers first, Doctor. His tone was professional but cold. Officer Daniels, the older one with the mustache, stepped forward. Subject was observed running in an area with recent break-ins. When questioned, she became confrontational and reached for something in her pocket. I told them I was reaching for my phone, Zora said calmly. To call my brother, who's an attorney. Chief Reynolds nodded slowly, taking in the scene. More neighbors had appeared on porches and sidewalks, watching the drama unfold. Some had phones out. And at what point did you check her ID? The chief asked. The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. We were about to transport her to the station for further questioning, Officer Burke said. So you handcuffed a woman jogging in her own neighborhood without checking her ID first? Chief Reynolds' voice remained even, but his disapproval was clear. A decorated military officer, no less. Zora watched the scene unfold with detached interest. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about a much bigger problem. As a SEAL, she'd been trained to see the full battlefield, not just the skirmish in front of her. If I may, Chief, she said, her voice drawing everyone's attention. Perhaps we could continue this discussion somewhere less public. I think we all have better ways to spend our morning than creating a neighborhood spectacle. The chief looked at her with something like admiration. Always the tactician, Commander. He turned to Dr. Thompson. Doctor, I appreciate your intervention here. Can I count on receiving a copy of that video? Already emailed it to your department, the doctor replied. And to my lawyer. Zora suppressed a smile. The doctor reminded her of her grandfather, quiet until it mattered, then unflinching. Officers, return to the station and prepare your reports. Every detail. The chief's order left no room for argument. I'll be reviewing them personally within the hour. As the two officers retreated to their cruiser, Burke glanced back at Zora, his expression a mix of embarrassment and resentment. She met his gaze steadily, without anger. She'd faced far worse. The crowd of neighbors had grown. Whispers spread from person to person. That's Tom Williams's daughter, the one who joined the Navy. She's some kind of special forces now. Chief Reynolds turned back to Zora. Commander, I'd like to personally apologize for this incident. This is not how we train our officers to conduct themselves. Zora nodded, accepting but not dismissing. Years in military leadership had taught her when to accept apologies and when to demand accountability. This situation needed both. I understand that policing isn't easy, Chief, she said. Neither is combat. But in both cases, how we handle pressure defines us. The chief's eyebrows rose slightly at her measured response. I'd like to speak with you more about this, if you're willing. Not as a victim filing a complaint, but as someone with expertise in high-pressure situations. Dr. Thompson stepped closer. The commander was just tackled to the ground by your officers, Chief. Perhaps she needs medical attention before meetings. I'm fine, Doctor, Zora assured him. SEALs are built tough. A young woman pushed through the small crowd, her eyes wide with worry. Auntie Zora, someone called the house, said you were being arrested. Zora turned to her niece with a reassuring smile. Everything's okay, Tasha. Just a misunderstanding. Chief Reynolds watched this exchange, his expression thoughtful. Commander, my office is open to you whenever you're ready to talk. I think there's a lot we could learn from each other. Zora considered this as she put an arm around her worried niece. The incident had been humiliating and unjust, but maybe, just maybe, it could lead to something constructive. I'll be there at noon, Chief, she decided. And I'll bring some ideas from my training that might help your department. As the crowd began to disperse and the police cars pulled away, Zora stood tall in the morning sunlight. This wasn't the run she had planned, but the path forward was clear. At exactly noon, Zora walked into the Oak Ridge Police Department. She changed from her running clothes into a simple blue button-down shirt and khaki pants, civilian clothes, but her military bearing was unmistakable. Several officers glanced up as she entered, then quickly looked away. Word had spread fast. The front desk officer stood immediately. "Commander Williams, Chief Reynolds is expecting you." As Zora followed him through the station, she noticed how conversations hushed when she passed. Eyes followed her, some curious, some embarrassed, some defensive. She'd felt similar stares in foreign countries, walking into rooms where women, especially black women, weren't expected to hold authority. Chief Reynolds stood when she entered his office. "Commander, thank you for coming." "Thank you for the invitation," Zora replied, taking the offered seat. She noticed a familiar folder on his desk, her military record, the non-classified version at least. "I've been reading about you," the chief admitted, tapping the folder. "Impressive doesn't begin to cover it." Zora nodded but didn't comment. She hadn't come for compliments. "I've also reviewed the officer's reports and watched Dr. Thompson's video several times," Reynolds continued, his expression grave. "What happened this morning was unacceptable." "Yes, it was," Zora agreed simply. The chief seemed surprised by her directness. "Officer Burke and Officer Daniels have been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation." Zora leaned forward slightly. "And then what, Chief?" "They get a reprimand. Sensitivity training. 2 weeks desk duty." Reynolds didn't answer immediately, studying her face instead. "You don't seem angry." "I passed angry about 3 miles into my run today," Zora said. "Now I'm focused on solutions." A knock at the door interrupted them. A young officer entered with 2 cups of coffee, setting them down without making eye contact before quickly leaving. "Your officers are scared of me now," Zora observed, picking up her cup. "That's not helpful either." The chief sighed heavily. "What would you suggest, Commander?" "You've led teams in situations I can barely imagine. How would you handle this?" Zora took a sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. In the field, she never rushed decisions. Why start now? In SEAL training, we have a saying, "The only easy day was yesterday." It means we expect challenges. We prepare for them. We don't pretend they don't exist. She set her cup down. "Your department needs to stop pretending." "Pretending what?" Reynolds asked, though his expression suggested he knew. "That bias doesn't affect policing. That split-second decisions aren't influenced by what officers expect to see rather than what's actually there." Zora's voice remained calm but firm. "In combat, those kinds of assumptions get people killed." Outside the office window, she could see Officers Burke and Daniels sitting at desks, filling out paperwork. Burke looked up, caught her eye, then quickly looked down again. "I'm not here to punish those officers, Chief," Zora continued. "I'm here because I think my experience might actually help." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "SEAL teams operate in environments where misreading a situation means mission failure or worse. We train intensively on threat assessment, bias recognition, and decision-making under pressure." She leaned forward. "Those skills translate to good policing." The chief looked thoughtful. "You're suggesting some kind of training program?" "I have 2 weeks of leave," Zora replied. "I could work with your department on implementing some of our protocols, adapted for civilian policing, of course." Reynolds sat back surprised. "After what happened this morning, you're offering to help us?" Zora smiled slightly. "Chief, I spent my career serving my country. That service doesn't stop when I'm wearing running shoes instead of combat boots." Before Reynolds could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression tightened. "The video from this morning has gone viral. Local news is picking it up." Zora wasn't surprised. In today's world, incidents like these rarely stayed quiet. All the more reason to show your department is taking concrete steps, not just making apologies. The chief nodded slowly. "What would you need to get started?" "A room big enough for your officers. Equipment for scenario training." And those two, she nodded toward Burke and Daniels through the window in the first session. Reynolds followed her gaze. "You want to work directly with the officers who detained you." "In my line of work, Chief, we don't have the luxury of avoiding people who've made mistakes. We help them learn from those mistakes so the whole team gets stronger." Zora stood, extending her hand. "Do we have a deal?" The chief stood and shook her hand firmly. "We do, Commander. And for what it's worth, thank you." Zora nodded once professionally. "I'll see you tomorrow morning." 600 hours. First lesson, proper threat assessment in low light conditions. As she walked out through the station, the eyes that followed her now held something different: curiosity and perhaps a glimmer of respect. The community center gymnasium was dark when the police officers filed in at 5:45 the next morning. Then moved uncertainly, voices hushed, eyes straining to adjust to the darkness. 15 officers total, including Burke and Daniels, who stood apart from the others. "Is this some kind of joke?" someone whispered. A voice answered from the shadows, calm and commanding. "This is lesson 1. The lights came on suddenly, temporarily blinding everyone. Zora stood in the center of the room, dressed in navy blue training clothes, her posture relaxed but alert. 6 minutes, she said. That's how long you've been in this room. In that time, none of you noticed the 3 potential weapons I placed in plain sight. None of you identified the 2 exit routes besides the main door. And none of you spotted me until I spoke." The officers exchanged glances. Burke crossed his arms defensively. "With respect, Commander," he said, "we're not playing war games here." "No," Zora agreed. "What you're doing is far more difficult. You make life or death decisions on American streets, with American civilians, while following American laws." She walked forward, her movements precise. "In some ways, your job is harder than mine." This wasn't what they expected her to say. Several officers straightened, their attention sharpening. "The difference is training," Zora continued. "SEALs train to overcome our natural instincts and biases. We train to see what's actually there, not what we expect to see." She gestured to a table covered with a sheet. "Under here are 30 objects. You'll have 15 seconds to memorize them before I cover them again." She pulled the sheet away, revealing an assortment of everyday items. The officers leaned forward, eyes darting across the table, mentally cataloging the objects. After exactly 15 seconds, Zora replaced the sheet. "Officer Chen," she called to a young officer near the back. "How many weapons were on that table?" He thought for a moment. 3. The knife, the gun, and the baseball bat. Zora nodded. "Officer Washington, what color was the gun?" "Black," the female officer answered confidently. "Actually," Zora said, "there was no gun on the table." Murmurs spread through the group. "But I saw it," Washington insisted, "next to the wallet." "What you saw was a black TV remote," Zora explained. "Your brain expected to see weapons, so it categorized objects accordingly." She looked around the room. "How many of you thought you saw a gun?" Over half the officers raised their hands, including Burke. "This isn't about intelligence or attention," Zora assured them. "It's about how our brains process information under pressure. When we're primed to see threats, we find threats, even when they aren't there." Chief Reynolds, standing near the door, watched with growing interest. "Yesterday," Zora continued, "Officers Burke and Daniels saw a threat in a woman jogging. Their brains filled in details that weren't there, making a phone look like a weapon, making questions sound like defiance." Burke stayed at the floor, jaw tight. Daniels looked uncomfortable but thoughtful. "I'm not here to shame anyone," Zora said, her voice softer. "I've made similar mistakes in the field. The difference is, my team trained relentlessly to recognize and correct those errors." She pulled the sheet off the table again. "Look again. What do you actually see?" The officers studied the table more carefully this time. Everyday objects. A coffee mug, keys, a remote control, a hairbrush, a wallet. "The knife?" Officer Chen asked. "Plastic picnic knife," Zora confirmed. "The bat?" "A miniature souvenir from the local baseball team." Objects aren't inherently threatening, context matters. For the next hour, she ran them through increasingly complex exercises. Identifying objects in low light, distinguishing between similar items under time pressure, recognizing when their assumptions affected their observations. By the end, even the most skeptical officers were engaged. Burke approached her as the session wrapped up. "This isn't what I expected," he admitted grudgingly. "What did you expect?" Zora asked. "Honestly, to be made an example of, to be humiliated." Zora shook her head. "That doesn't help anyone. In the field, we can't afford grudges or ego. Neither can your department." As the officers filed out, talking among themselves, Chief Reynolds approached. "That was not standard police training." "No," Zora agreed. but it addresses the root of the problem. Tomorrow, we tackle decision-making under stress. Through the window, she could see the gymnasium parking lot where a small crowd of community members had gathered. Some held signs, "Justice for Zora" and "Police Accountability Now." "Your fan club?" Reynolds asked, frowning. "A reminder," Zora corrected, "of why this work matters." She watched Burke and Daniels walk to their cars, surrounded by their fellow officers. No isolation, no shame, just the hard work of becoming better. Just like SEAL training had taught her, the team rises or falls together. 3 months later, Zora stood at the back of the Oak Ridge Community Center, watching as Officer Burke led a demonstration for local residents. The change in him was remarkable. Gone was the defensive posture, the quick anger. Instead, he moved with confidence tempered by humility. "The most important thing we've learned," he was saying to the crowd, "is that good policing isn't about power. It's about perception and communication." Zora smiled slightly. Those were her words, now coming naturally from him. Her 2 weeks of leave had stretched into a month-long special assignment with the Navy's blessing. What had started as a training program for 15 officers had expanded to the entire department and was now being adopted by 3 neighboring counties. Chief Reynolds appeared at her side. "Your flight leaves tomorrow?" She nodded. "Back to active duty." "The department won't be the same without you," he said, watching as Burke demonstrated a de-escalation technique to an engaged audience. "Neither will the community." The changes had gone beyond training. After that first viral video, Zora had become something of a local celebrity. Rather than hiding from the publicity, she had channeled it, bringing residents and officers together for community dialogues. Old wounds began to heal. New relationships formed. "Officer Daniels is retiring next month," Reynolds continued. "He wants you to speak at his ceremony." Zora raised an eyebrow. "The same Officer Daniels who handcuffed me 3 months ago. The same one who now tells every new recruit about how meeting you changed his entire approach to policing," Reynolds replied. His words, not mine. Across the room, Zora's aunt was deep in conversation with several community elders. They had been skeptical at first, unwilling to trust promises of police reform they'd heard before. But week by week, as they saw real changes in how officers interacted with their neighborhood, their skepticism had softened. Commander Williams, a young girl, no more than 12, approached shyly. "Can I ask you something?" Zora knelt down to eye level with the child. "Of course." "My teacher says you're a hero, but you don't look like the heroes in movies." The girl's mother looked mortified, but Zora just smiled. "Heroes come in all shapes and sizes," she said gently. "Sometimes they wear capes, sometimes they wear uniforms, and sometimes," she tapped the girl's chest, right over her heart, "they look just like you." The girl beamed. Behind her, Burke was finishing his presentation to enthusiastic applause. "I should go," Zora said, rising. "I've got packing to do." Chief Reynolds walked her to the door. "The training manual you developed is being reviewed by the State Police Academy. They want to incorporate it into their standard curriculum." Outside, the early evening air was cool and fresh. Zora took a deep breath, remembering that morning 3 months ago when she'd been tackled to this same pavement. So much had changed since then. "You know," Reynolds said thoughtfully, "there's a position opening up. Training coordinator for the county. The kind of role that might interest a decorated officer looking to transition to civilian life." Zora laughed. "I've got a few more missions in me yet, Chief." "Just something to think about," he pressed. "What you started here needs someone to keep it going." As if on cue, Officers Burke and Daniels emerged from the building. 3 months ago, they had been symbols of everything wrong with policing. Now they were champions of a new approach, still imperfect, still learning, but fundamentally changed. "Commander," Burke said, extending his hand. "I never properly thanked you." Zora shook his hand firmly. "No thanks needed, officer. Just keep doing the work." "That's the plan," Daniels said. "We're taking what you taught us to the academy next month, rookie training." A group of neighborhood kids ran past, playing a game of tag. One of them waved at the officers, who waved back with genuine warmth. Such a small thing, Zora thought, but unimaginable 3 months ago. "Your run tomorrow morning still on?" Reynolds asked. "The department jogging club wants to give you a proper send-off." The jogging club had been Zora's idea, officers and residents running together weekly, breaking down barriers 1 mile at a time. 500 hours, she confirmed. Don't be late. As she walked away, heading toward her aunt's house in the fading light, Zora felt a sense of completion. Her SEAL team waited for her across the country, another mission on the horizon. But part of her would always remain here, in the changes she had helped create. Sometimes the most important battles weren't fought on foreign soil, but on the streets of home. And sometimes the greatest victories weren't won with weapons, but with wisdom, patience, and an unwavering belief that people could be better than their worst moments. Tomorrow, she would run these streets again, but this time she wouldn't run alone.